And I wanted to thank everybody for being here today. We're very excited that all of you were able to join us. We're excited for the wonderful presentations we have ahead in regards to the critical role of the adult ally in youth-led programming. The department is truly committed to youth-led prevention. We really want to develop the public value so that we can continue this work, continue to build this work to ensure that our young people are ready for adulthood. We want them to be ready for life, for college, for work, whatever their journey takes them, wherever it takes them. We want to ensure that they have the skills, the supports that they need locally, and they can't do that without all of you. The work you do is so valuable, so important, and we appreciate it so much. And really look to you as the leaders to help move this forward. We know that coming together at the state level, at the local level, we can truly not only impact the individual person that we're working with, but collectively we can impact our communities, our schools, to truly make a difference and create environments where our young people can thrive. So with that, I am going to turn the podium over to Christy Valentini from the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network's Adult Council. She is our co-chair this year, so I would like to bring Ms. Christy up, and she's going to share a few words. Thank you.
I skipped everything. I'm going to read straight from the script. I better stick to the script or you might not invite me back. So, all right. Hello. Thank you for being with us today. I see so many familiar faces and so many new ones. It's so nice. I'm so excited. As you can see, we have a wonderful, outstanding lineup of nationally recognized researchers and practitioners in the youth programming field that share the same compassion and commitment to youth-led prevention that we do in the state of Ohio. So my name is Christy Valentini, like Valerie said, and I am the co-chair of the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network's Adult Council, OYLPN. So, like I said, I better skip to the script. So, the OYLPN is a joint venture between the Drug Free Action Alliance, DFAA, and Ohio Mental Health and Addiction Services, Ohio MOS. So OYLPN was created in 2011 with the purpose of building and expanding the partnerships between youth-led programs in order to develop and strengthen these efforts at both the state and local levels. Currently, OYLPN has connected with over 150 youth-led organizations throughout Ohio dedicated to empowering youth in their communities. To maximize success, DFAA and Ohio MOS created two advisory councils: the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network Adult Council and the Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network Youth Council. These councils provide leadership, infrastructure, and prevention science workforce development opportunities to assist local youth-led prevention organizations in implementing effective, evidence-based prevention. If you're interested in learning more about OYLPN, please speak with members from our Adult Council today. We have the lovely red little ribbons underneath our name tags. So, I encourage you to speak with members in order to learn more about and to connect with our network. Additional information from OYLPN is also available on those lovely green flash drives provided to you in your registration packet. All right, for housekeeping details, 5.75 continuing education hours have been approved for both the Ohio Counselor, Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapist Board, and the Ohio Chemical Dependency Professionals Board. Certificates and participant evaluation forms will be sent electronically after the conference. I also want to call attention to the baskets and piece of paper on your table. Throughout the day, we encourage you to write down any questions you have for our presenters. We'll be hosting a panel discussion at the end of the day and would like to incorporate your questions into the conversation. So please be sure to write yours down, and we'll be collecting the questions from the baskets throughout the day. We're very excited to have a diverse representation of adult leaders from across Ohio dedicated to protecting and promoting the well-being of youth here. And now I'd like to introduce, it's my pleasure, Dr. Holly Raffel from Ohio University to explain how youth-led prevention initiatives in Ohio are being evaluated. Thanks, Holly.
Good morning. How's that? Can you hear me in the back? Good? Okay, I'm getting back up here. So as Christy mentioned, I'm Holly Raffel from Ohio University's Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs. And I've had the pleasure, along with my colleague Jessica Calera, of evaluating the work of youth-led prevention initiatives in the state of Ohio. And I would be remiss without saying that Jessica was really the driving force behind arranging the speakers and really pulling this conversations that we're going to have today together. She unexpectedly went on maternity leave about a month early this week, so she is definitely with us here today in spirit. What I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today is the Youth Empowerment Conceptual Model Framework developed by Deborah Holden and her colleagues. And it's displayed on the screen behind me, and it's also available as a handout in your registration packets. This is a framework that is currently being used as an evaluation to document the work of youth-led prevention initiatives in Ohio. This framework provides an overview of the critical processes and outcomes associated with youth-led efforts. The top part of the model, so this part up here, identifies empowering processes such as group structures and climate that contribute to young people's ongoing participation in youth-led initiatives. The bottom half of the model, so this part down here, identifies the individual, group, and community outcomes that youth-led initiatives seek to impact. The information that will be presented today speaks directly to some of the processes and outcomes outlined in this model. For example, all of the presentations highlight the critical role that adults play as allies and facilitators of youth-led initiatives. This same idea is reflected in the displayed model. You'll notice that adult involvement is highlighted in the top center of the model. And the arrows extending from it indicate that adults' have a direct role in shaping the group structures and the group climate. Essentially, adults create the environment and processes that ultimately lead to youth and community outcomes. It is for this reason that we selected the conference theme, Creating Opportunities for Youth to Lead, the critical role of adult allies. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for being those allies. Our first presenters, Larson and Dina Eisenstark, will focus on the skills and dispositions adults need in order to effectively engage youth leaders. Next, Katie Richards-Schuster will provide more detail about how to effectively design and implement or structure youth-led initiatives. After lunch, Bianca Baldridge will address issues of climate and how we can create inclusive environments for all of our youth participants. Our final speaker, Karen Pittman, will speak more directly to the bottom part of this model down here, our ultimate outcomes, and how we can engage young people in collective impact efforts in order to create individual and community change. Each of these presentations will force us all to reflect on the critical components of the work we do each and every day with young people. While the Youth Empowerment Framework, or what we refer to as the Holden Model, given the authors' names, is useful as an evaluation tool, it can also be useful for each and every one of you. It can be used as a guide for adult leaders to critically reflect how they design and implement youth-led initiatives. It also helps adult leaders focus on the intended outcomes of their work with young people. In order to facilitate some critical reflection around youth-led work in the Holden Model, we developed questionnaires that are included on your flash drives that you picked up when you got your registration packet. The questionnaires, just like today's presentations, are intended to get all of you talking and thinking about the critical components of the work that we all do on a daily basis. These questionnaires, along with other resources on the Holden Model, can be found in the Holden Model folder on the flash drive. I encourage you to review these materials, and I strongly encourage you to use today's information and the resources provided to reflect how the processes that you have in place at the local level with your youth-led groups ultimately lead to the type of change you hope to see for Ohio's communities and Ohio's young people. Next, I'd like to introduce Ian Ridgway. He's a graduate student at Ohio University who will be highlighting some of the additional resources that are provided to you on your flash drive.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ian. Like she said, I'm a student at Ohio University's Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs. Just want to take a quick moment, go over the flash drives that you guys should have picked up at registration. If you didn't, you can always, at a break, run back down there and grab one. So we have here pretty much the folders that you'll see when you look at your flash drive. The Holden model resources, pretty much everything Holly just talked about. You have in there information on the framework, that handout you have in your packets, a little PowerPoint presentation, a webinar, and 2 draft questionnaires that are intended to guide adult leaders in designing youth-led efforts fitting the Holden model. In the MHA resources, primarily we have a prevention taxonomy. It's information about Ohio Moss prevention strategies and funding sources for various types of prevention programs. So just information about where you can get some funding for various programs. OYLPN resources. This has the strategic plan and logic model for Ohio Youth-Led Prevention Network, as well as a contact directory for as many adult allies as we could get a hold of their information. And it has a toolkit for how to operate an effective youth-led program back in your home community. The speaker presentations, all the presentations you'll see today, the PowerPoints, etc., are all in that folder. And the last one, resources for adult allies, essentially I went to SAMHSA's website, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, and CADCA, which is the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, and just pulled some resources that would be very effective for really any kind of program you guys want to do, how to run anything like that. So SAMHSA does a lot on mental health, bullying, suicide, whole range of things like that. And CADCA primarily does tools for community-based programs. So just a lot of different resources that you guys can have. And it's all essentially how it's organized is it's a Word document organized by subject matter with a hyperlink to the actual source. Some of them you don't get the exact direct source, but you get to a page where you can order the source, and pretty much all of them are free. So all you got to do is click order, and they'll send it to you within a week or so. So thank you guys for your time. I'd like to invite Bobby Persinger, an adult council member, up to the podium to introduce today's first speaker.
Good morning, everybody. How are you feeling so far? It's early, but it's going to be a good day, right? I have to tell you, as a member of OYLPN's Adult Council, I was really excited about today because I got to thinking last night about, the state of affairs that seem to be controlling the news cycle nowadays, and I thought tomorrow's going to be a great day because I'm going to be with a group of people who believe in the young people of our world, who know that they're going to do great things, who are going to make big things happen in our planet, all for the positive. So that's really exciting. So I'm glad to see you all in the room, and the room is full, which is amazing. So I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, or set of speakers. Reed Larson is a professor in the departments of Human and Community Development, Psychology, and Educational Psychology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research focuses on the daily developmental experiences of adolescents, particularly in the context of youth development programs and families. He is the author of Divergent Realities, The Emotional Lives of Mothers, Fathers, and Adolescents with Marseille Richards, and Being Adolescent, Conflict and Growth in Teenage Years with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He has served as the president of the Society for Research on Adolescence and is the editor-in-chief of New Directions for Child and Adolescent Development with Lene Jensen. We also have Dina Isenstark. Dina is a certified Parks and Recreation professional and a doctoral student in the Department of Human and Community Development at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from the Department of Recreation, Sport, and Tourism at UIUC. Prior to returning to graduate school, she worked as a leisure services supervisor at the Park District in the Chicago suburbs. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome both Dina and Reed.
Good morning, Ohio. I can't hear you. All right, okay, good. Well, we're excited to be here. Are you called Ohioans? I'm so jealous. I mean, Illinois, we don't have something they call us. That's probably why our government is so screwed up and we don't have cool things happening like what's happening here. I'm really honored to be here and to be a part of this kind of movement in Ohio. And before I get started, I wanted to learn just a little bit about you. How many of you have run a youth-led program before this initiative? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you are new? How many of you have 3 years or less of experience running this kind of program? Okay, a few novices. How many of you have 10 years experience or more running programs for teenagers? Okay, we have a lot of veterans, and we're going to depend on you veterans for help today and especially your expertise. And so we're going to have fun today. Dina and Cole Perry is along with us as well. Our goal is, in this session, is to kind of immerse us all in thinking about some of those day-to-day decisions that go with running a youth-led program. And we'll have some breakout groups or table discussions. But let me start you with a few more questions. And these are kind of simplified yes-no questions just to kind of get us into the mood. So imagine that you're the adult leader of a youth program and you face these challenging situations, okay? A group of youth wants you to exclude a member from an upcoming retreat because he's too bossy. How many people say yes, they would do that? How many people say no? Okay, one person, why say no? Anybody want to volunteer? Okay, need one volunteer, yes, loudly.
Because I believe in the potential of all the kids to be there, that not just where they're at, but where they can be because of the retreat.
Great, okay, good. Everybody got that? Next situation. Youth are planning a campaign, but they hit a decision that requires understanding how the school board thinks. Do you help them? How many people say yes to that? Okay, a lot of yeses. How many people say no? Okay, pretty strong consensus on that. And why help them? If this is youth-led, why would you help them out? One volunteer? Yes?
Gotta give them direction, to know where to start.
Okay, gotta give them, and you have some knowledge they don't have. Okay, here's the third one, maybe a little more difficult, and this is the first sheet on your handout that we gave you. We're going to just do a simplified version for now. Youth in a program were invited by a state agency to give a presentation on drug prevention in their high school. The agency provided a slideshow to use, but it was loaded with graphs and charts, and the youth thought it would be a real bore. They wanted to create their own presentation, which would be more alive and action-oriented. Do you, one, try to get them to use the graphs and charts in order to stick to the message prepared by the state? How many people say yes on that? Okay, nobody for yes. Okay. The state of Ohio is watching you. Or two, do you support their desire to create their own presentation? Yes, okay. So the state of Ohio didn't put me up to that. So we're going to get to some situations that are more difficult, and as I said, we'll have some table discussions to dive into more of these. And part of the point is there's a whole range of daily situations you face running a youth-led program that can be hard, and so we want to kind of practice and share ideas on what those have been for you, and we have some specific examples to kind of help with that discussion. So, and I want to focus on a particular kind of dilemma that's often discussed in the field. How do you balance the right amount of adult authority with youth empowerment or agency. Okay? So I'm actually going to use the word agency instead of empowerment. I'm an academic. I always got my jargon. By agency, I mean decision-making, leadership, empowerment, responsibility, ownership, freedom to decide, a lot of beautiful things. So we're going to talk about the balance between adult authority and can you get into using youth agency instead, a little more flexible term. And we all agreed, or those that raised their hand, that you don't want to step in with your authority to exclude a bossy youth, we want to support youth agency, but there are times when adult authority is essential, such as for knowledge about a school board, also structuring situations. But there are many situations in daily life where it's not so clear and where it gets complicated. And so, as I said, many scholars and many youth development people have talked about this balance as a challenge. So when and how do you support youth agency, voice, ownership, and empowerment at the same time you're exerting the necessary authority? So we're going to go through these topics. First, I'm going to do kind of an introduction talking about youth and why youth-led programs are important, and then adult program leaders, and then we're going to talk about different kinds of decision-making. How do you give advice? When do you give advice? Setting limits and supporting youth, even when you might disagree. So that's where we're headed. Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. So let's start with youth, and I was a youth once. This is before I had long hair, but I have spent the last 35 years as a professor studying adolescence because I just have a really strong passion for people in that age period. I think it's a really exciting time where lots of new potentials are there. I also feel like our society just has a really bad take on adolescence. I mean, we get these really stupid stereotypes that really have little reality to them. Yes, it is very important to make sure we prevent drug use and other sorts of prevent youth from going down the same track, but that's only part of the equation. It's really important to see the enormous potentials that are there. And we've learned recently about the brain and that the adolescence is a time where the prefrontal cortex emerges as a command and control center for the brain, and a whole set of new circuits allows the brain to be more integrated, which allows the potential for youth to develop a whole new set of skills. So sort of general self-regulation across the brain, self-governance, more able to think in terms of goals. They can analyze behavior. Now, teens don't do that all the time, nor do we, but the skills start to be there to do more analysis. Understanding complex systems like groups, society, societal injustice, psychology, and perhaps one of the most powerful things is capacities to be a conscious producer of your own development, to be able to name things, to name complex, ambiguous situations, to create structures that help you think, that help you resolve issues, that help you be a leader, a whole set of new potentials. But the key thing is that they're just potentials. The brain changes. That doesn't automatically turn you into this incredibly powerful person. I think the best way to explain this is just as puberty doesn't itself make you into a skilled athlete, right? I mean, it would be great if it did. The brain changes of adolescence don't make you mature or give you leadership or other socio-emotional skills. It creates that potential. The new brain circuits are like muscles. They have to be developed through active, and I stress that word active. All the research said it has to be active learning to really develop these kind of executive connections across the brain. What research has been showing over a period of time is that youth programs turn out to be an especially good place, especially youth-led programs, for youth to start developing some of those more abstract, higher-level thinking skills. Let me just step back and tell you how I got interested in youth programs. For a long time, I did research in which I had teenagers carry beepers, and we'd signal them at random times, and every time they were signaled, they were supposed to stop what they were doing and fill out a report on what they were feeling at that point in time. So we asked about their emotions, we asked about how challenged they felt, how motivated they were, and we got tens of thousands of reports across teenagers' lives of all different kinds of teenagers. And so we looked at different contexts in their lives. And so school is a really big amount of teenagers' time, at least for many teenagers. And what we found is that compared to each student's average, they were more challenged during class, okay? But it maybe wasn't a good challenge that their motivation was way below average, okay? So it's sort of like you're challenged, but that's not what I want to be doing. Now, another huge amount of kids' time is with friends, and there was the opposite. Yeah, they were motivated to be with their friends, but it wasn't a particularly challenging time. I didn't put media up here, but when they were doing media, and this was back in the days when TV was the main media, both of these bars were down. It was like no challenge, no motivation. Remember, these are in-the-moment reports. The one place in their lives where these both come together are youth programs. They're both challenged and motivated. Numerous studies have since repeated this, and that's exactly what John Dewey and educational researchers say is ideal context for deep learning, when you're really invested in taking on challenges. So, given these findings, I stopped doing beeper research and I started studying youth programs because I thought, this is where learning really happens. There's really exciting things going on because kids' brains are totally there and they're engaged. Indeed, other people and myself started doing different kinds of studies, and we first studied 12 really high-quality kind of youth-led programs, including arts, STEM, and leadership programs. And then we have since done 13 more where we do intensive interviews over time. And they had experienced leaders, and the youth just reported learning all kinds of new skills. So they were using those earlier skills that I talked about, those potentials, to develop abilities for working with others, for coordinating their action, for understanding others' point of view, for understanding groups as a system. They were able not just to think ahead, but to plan, think strategically about actually doing a plan in the real world, which is a whole lot different than just solving a puzzle. A lot of Murphy's Law in there. They were learning about motivation and emotions, which are kind of weird, really, if you think about it. They're not exactly logical. They were learning those sorts of things, and just a whole lot of learning taking place. And we did another survey in which we compared the amount of learning on these in school versus in programs versus with their friends. And in programs, they just reported much higher rates of having learning experiences about these. So again, it's like youth programs, at least good youth-led programs, are this kind of growth zone. I'm a developmental psychologist, so I'm really interested in development. It was like a zone in which their brains are there and they're using it to analyze real-world experiences and develop skills about that. So part of what I'm trying to get to is what you're doing is really important. Supporting youth-led and youth agency is really important. So youth agency, that's half of our balance in ACT, right? Agency is essential, being active for developing teens' new advanced skills. Turns out agency is also a powerful motivator. Most of the day, kids are in school, and as you saw, when they're in school, they're not very motivated. But when you're put in charge of something with the right amount of support, that can be very motivating when you have a sense of ownership. A totally different reason that's equally important is having agency is a right. I mean, teenagers in our society aren't given responsibility for very much, but they're almost adults. They're learning a lot, and until we start treating them like adults, they're not going to be like adults. It's just a basic right that we should pay attention to. At the same time, however, there's certain risks to too little adult authority, and you acknowledge that. In the programs we studied, everybody was doing projects, and if leaders, and lots of other studies have shown that when leaders just say, okay, you do the project, I'm going in my office. I believe in youth. Youth can feel really overwhelmed. Even in our study, we saw there were times where kids would be, oh my God, I've never done this before. Oh my God, I got to speak in public. Oh, they've never done this, so they don't know what they're doing sometimes. They don't have the skills you do. And if adults aren't there, the projects very easily crash and burn, or get stuck, or just are kind of mediocre. In some cases, there's good documented cases where the adult told the kid to do what they want to do. Well, then they do things that really upset a lot of adults, stakeholders, and that's another concern. Kids didn't know it was going to be a problem. They thought it'd be a great idea, but there's kind of these landmines they didn't see. And then what happens that's even worse is then the adults come in and crash in and say, you were totally messed up. So the message is if you try something, the adults are ultimately going to undermine you and humiliate you. So authority has its roles, and that kind of gets us to talking about the adults a little bit. So at the same time we were studying programs, I was meeting all these great people. We don't all agree on what to call them. We use program leaders, but youth workers, advisors, adult allies, frontline staff. And the experienced ones knew a lot more about teenagers than I did. I mean, they really had great intuitive knowledge. So I was learning from them. I also began to see how complex their jobs really were. And Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon said that if you really want to understand a profession, the first thing you need to do is understand the different challenges practitioners face in their jobs, like the whole array of different kind of difficult things that come up or problems to be solved. And so that's what we started doing, and we've studied a lot of different kind of dilemmas that occur, but we were especially interested in this dilemma around authority of, okay, it's youth-led, but how do you strike that balance? Now, one of the things that makes it hard is that our notions of authority have changed. In the old days, in our grandparents' days, authority was top-down, unilateral, and people were expected to obey. And I was in India 10 years ago, and the Cub Scout motto was all about obey, obey, obey. And that's what it was like here in the past, I think, although we may overestimate. Anyway, the current ideas of authority is more recognition that authority involved, even to be respected as an authority figure, and this is especially true in youth programs, you're not going to get it just automatically. It's based on mutual trust and respect. Some cases youth may even resist if they don't like what you're doing or they don't think you have their best interest in mind. Ultimately, it's negotiated and earned. So that's part of the challenge here. So exercising authority can be difficult. Youth can also be really distrustful of, the distrust authority is almost an American phrase. from reading the literature, this is especially true in urban schools where kids have been dissed so many times that they're not going to trust adults without a lot of work. And then another issue is you're balancing oranges and eggplants, okay? Apples and oranges and eggplants. Notice here how there's 2 oranges with eggplant is weighing it down. Well, it's not quite like, you're absolutely equals. I mean, we say we're equals, but, what adults say carries a kind of weight with it, an implicit sort of authority, the fact that you have more knowledge than they do, even though you don't say it, they may experience that as you playing the adult card. So then another issue is just whether that balancing is the right metaphor. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. The word balancing come up all the time when I read about youth program. You got to balance, you got to balance, you got to balance. And I'm not getting rid of that, but there's a limit to how far that gets us. Some of you may have also seen this chart. Anybody see this? This is kind of an old one, but the idea is you go from adult-led programs to youth-led programs. The amount of adult authority goes down, and youth agency goes up. And it's kind of general, okay, helpful in terms of thinking about that transition. And it's helpful for those of you who are shifting. It's like, okay, you got to rebalance kind of more over here from when you were over here. But in terms of moment-to-moment situations, it implies that any degree of adult authority reduces youth agency, or vice versa. It sounds like there's a zero-sum game. And I'm not sure that's true, and we're going to talk about that today in terms of whether we think that's true. Is it me or them making decisions, or are there middle ways? So, on the one hand, we know that way too much authority can do this, and not enough authority can do that. Again, there's documented cases, but there's quite a bit of space in between. And we're going to talk about that inner space, and really how do you navigate the middle ground there. And so our question today is, so how do you balance, negotiate, optimize, or interweave your exercise of adult authority with support for youth agency? Okay, so that's where we're going to go. And the way we're going to do this is talk about 3 actions that vary from most authority to least authority. First, setting limits is something that involves kind of adults saying, okay, there's a limit of some kind here. Giving advice is a little bit in between. And then supporting even when you disagree is kind of at the other extreme. So we're going to start with advice, actually, and move to that end. And the method, the data I'm going to draw upon come from this idea. Daniel Kahneman, who's another Nobel Prize winner, said a good way to identify best practice is to learn from veteran practitioners. Maybe you've heard about 10,000 hours, but people who put in a lot of time in a field learn more and more, and they learn about real life. And so that's what we did. We interviewed a large number of experienced practitioners that had an average of 14 years of experience. They're mostly paid professionals. They worked in mostly youth-led program. Some were leadership, but there's also arts and technology programs there. And so we asked them about setting limits and so forth. When do you do it? How do you do it? Those sorts of things. And so we're going to now talk about each of those, and we're going to have some breakout sessions. So let's start with giving advice. See, the line is at the bottom there. This line, we've been working for weeks to get it from leaping up, so this is a great success. So we're going to start with giving advice. When we're talking about giving advice, we mean making suggestions, providing guidance or feedback on use, ideas, and work. So we're going to focus on advice about use work, not on personal advice, although that's important too. And some adults maybe don't think of giving advice as an act of authority, but it is. If you state your opinion, youth may interpret that as an act of authority. We're going to have a breakout discussion. We're going to give you a dilemma. If you can find your packet from us, there's a handout that looks like this. And Cole Perry is going to come up and introduce the first dilemma. And he'll describe it. You can read it along. And then we're going to take 5 minutes for you at your table to discuss it. So Cole, you want to come up and describe this?
So yeah, if you all will join me in entering the world of one of our practitioners, we're headed to downstate Illinois in our minds, and we'll be visiting a program called Nutrition Rocks. Nutrition Rocks is a youth-led program in which high school youth plan and run an educational summer day camp for elementary school children. The aim of the camp is to promote children's healthy eating through activities led by older youth. During the spring, youth in the program are starting to pilot the games they'll be using, trying them out on 4th and 5th grade children at local elementary schools. The youth developed a game called Choose My Plate, in which children on a team each serve simulated food from one of 5 different food groups: vegetables, grains, protein.
Desserts.
And dessert. The children's task is to serve helpings to each family member, acted out by other kids. The parents, the teenage athlete, and the infant each have different appetites and favorite foods. The goal of the game is for each group to make sure each person gets a plate with appropriate nutrition, and there's a reward for groups that do this successfully. However, the activity does not go well at the first school they practice at. The children had difficulty coordinating with the other food groups to meet each person's needs, especially when the actors got into character and requested an unhealthy meal. Afterwards, the youth come to a reflection session and they're discouraged. They sit in a circle with their program leader, Miss Pamela. The youth talk and joke about how badly the game went, but they don't seem to have any ideas on how to fix it for the next practice session. Miss Pamela has some ideas about how to improve the game, but she wants to make sure the youth maintain ownership of their program here. So your task in your groups at your tables, imagine you are in Miss Pamela's place in the Nutrition Rocks program. What would your goals be in this situation? If you decide to help the youth, how would you go about doing it? Dina, Reed, and I went around and we thought we'd share a few of our favorite ones from you all with the whole group here.
Which was hard because everything you were saying was great and
Great.
useful.
Yeah, and so we heard things that our leaders that we studied didn't come up with, and then we had a session after. We were coming up with more ideas and heard way more from all these minds in the room, so that was great. From this table back here, I heard about they were saying how one of their first steps would be they would talk about what went well in this activity and help the youth talk about their successes with getting a lot of participation in this game. That was really cool. We hadn't thought of that before. From a table back there, from behind the screen, we still heard you too. And I heard they were talking about, they had an insight about how they would help the youth figure out, or help the youth themselves determine what the problem was and pinpoint it themselves by asking sort of guiding questions. Like, what do you think was going on there? What happened there? So that was interesting to hear from you all.
And I listened in on that side of the room, and the leaders came up with many great responses. Some of the ones that really stood out to me, one was that they would enter the brainstorming session and not just tell youth what to do, but they wanted them to be invested and listen, and listen to what they thought they could do better. Another table discussed how they would really just encourage youth and say, this is practice, this is trial and error, keep learning, you're going to implement more sessions. And another great piece of advice I
I listened to was they said they would try to solicit feedback from more quieter members in the group and not just listen to, you know, the more vocal, but try to, you know, hear all the different participants' responses. So it was really great to hear from you guys too.
Okay, so I heard a lot of great things too, but I wanted to share with you what the leaders we studied said. And we asked about a lot of advice-giving situations and compiled across them what the themes were. So I think the first thing we asked, well, what were their goals in advice-giving situations? And we found that there are 3 different goals that were sometimes in conflict with each other. Leaders said first they set a high priority on helping youth succeed. So one said, my goals are to have a really good final product, to have them feel good about what they've written, and you know, at first I kind of hesitated about, okay, succeed, is that really important? Isn't it the learning that counts? But in fact, when I read the literature and heard from the leaders more, they said, no, it's really important. It builds confidence. It creates morale for the group. It creates motivation for the next time around. Those of you who know the literature on community organizing says that when you got a new group, you need some easy wins to build up their confidence because they're doing something new. So that was one goal. Second goal was support youth agency. Whatever they want to do is fine. So one of our favorite leaders said, it's just second nature. It's their program. I want them to have ownership. It's just kind of as automatic. You know, we want them to have decision. And many other leaders just said the same thing. They have assets. Let them decide. And then a third goal was helping facilitate development of executive skills. And leaders described giving advice, sometimes quite assertively, aimed at helping youth learn executive skills. So it wasn't advice in the sense of, you should do this, but let me read you an example. Tyler Bates, who ran a program in which youth made films, said his goal was helping young people really think clearly about their intent. That it's not enough for youth to just say, this is my work and that's the way I did it, but for the decision they're making, that they know the reasons behind them, that they considered their options and they made their choices stylistically, artistically, and otherwise. And they can articulate why they made that choice as opposed to other options. So we had a bunch of other quotes like this where leaders were describing using an opportunity like this to kind of, it's paradoxical. You want them to have agents, but you also want them to develop skills, so they would sometimes be assertive. So all 3 of these goals had to do with supporting development, and they came into play in different situations. Leaders waited for the right moment. The big question is how leaders gave advice. And a lot of the leaders, when we said, well, how do you give advice? The first thing they told us was how not to give advice. You know, you should never say, you should do this, or I don't think that looks good. Enrique Ceballos said, it's a very sensitive issue when you tell somebody, I'm right and that's wrong. They never say anything, but you can see it in their faces, like they hate me, and I lose credibility with them. I lose them. Now, this isn't necessarily every youth, but coming in as the adult, playing their youth role can, if you do it consistently or too arrogantly, he was a relatively new leader, can turn them off. So in terms of how they gave advice, we had examples. They all gave us examples of how they gave advice, and we found a bunch of themes which were themes we heard from you. One was about timing. Be patient. Let them go at their own speed. They described having kind of learned that they're not like adults, a committee where the committee goes right to the task at hand. Sometimes you have to kind of let them make sure everybody's on board because youth really care about the relationships. So sometimes they would wait and give really youth the chance to play out their idea and learn from themselves. So that idea of patience, of kind of waiting, withholding, waiting your moment. Another thing they did was present advice as options. Let's see, where am I? For example, they told youth, you can take it or leave it. Silvana Okos, a visual artist, said, I've learned a lot of ideas that I put forth that they can entertain, but they can make the final decision. A third thing, whoops, we got the third thing already, using guiding questions, and we heard that from you. Rather than giving them the answer, help them process, ask them questions, let it come from them. Questions are a really powerful tool because they leave responsibility for answering the questions with the group or with the youth. Really good research by Shirley Heath in 1990s found also that when leaders ask questions, youth, it's contagious. Youth learn to ask questions. Within 2 or 3 weeks, she found that the whole group would take on. They learned from the experienced youth. They'd be asking questions, because that's what planning's about, right? It's asking questions. In a matter of weeks, the youth were learning, how do we get the children's attention? What if they spill the food? How can we have a 100-pound third grader pretending to be an infant? That creativity of questioning asking is one of the skills they learn quickly from each other. And maybe the most important thing was that advice giving was almost always in two-way conversations. Okay, they didn't just charge in with their advice, they'd ask questions first, and there'd be a back and forth. They would provide advice based on what the youth said. So just to give you an example, let's go back to our dilemma. And this is Pamela West. And she describes much of what you said. I always start with, what do you think we need to do? Actually, sometimes she doesn't start at all. She just says, okay, you guys start discussing. So that allows them to tell me what they think they need to do. And if they leave out something, then I can add to it. I want them to remember they're in control. So she's very careful to keep the control with them, and then they'll come back to me with a question, and I'll throw it back. What do you think you need to do? So without telling them, get them to think about it, and I heard a number of tables saying that sort of thing. So now the well-kept secret here, or maybe you guys know this, but when we interviewed the youth, they said they really liked advice if it was given in this way, if leaders were calm and not pushy and not putting them down. Advice from leaders when they needed it, when they warned them that ideas wouldn't work, when they kept them from getting over their heads. Here's one youth. It helps me look at different views. It helps me see different aspects of things. So if they have a suggestion, maybe it looks better that way. Maybe I wasn't thinking that way. Maybe I can combine both of ours together. We're not, he's not saying, tell me what to do. He's saying, under the right conditions, restrained advice can be helpful. Just to summarize, what we learned about advice was, first, there was a lot of restraint. Compared to your average adult, these leaders are really good at, biting their tongues, holding back, respecting youth, not telling them the right answer. And a lot of times they used their knowledge and authority in ways that strengthened youth's agency, not diminished it. They would find kind of soft touch approaches to providing advice, or again, be assertive sometimes about, okay, what's your intent? What are your goals? Have you thought about this? Their question asking was designed not to fix the problem, but to help you think more systematically. Okay, we're going to go on now to setting limits. And so when we're talking about setting limits, this includes creating boundaries, forbidding certain things, channeling youth's work, and if it's a youth-led program, do you do it? Do you set limits? When do you do it? How do you do it? So again, we have an example we're going to have you discuss. And Dina's going to come up and introduce this example.
So please follow along as I read Dilemma B from your handouts. The Station is a youth-led program in which teenagers in an ethnically and economically diverse suburb plan events for other youth. It has a positive reputation in the community for organizing successful, well-attended events. The youth have been asked to plan the Recreation Center's 4th of July celebration for about 300 high schoolers. In the brainstorming session at the first planning meeting, youth get excited about inviting several local rappers. Cliff Sullivan, the leader of the program for the last 13 years, is concerned because some of the rappers they want to invite have a reputation for not always showing up and for having questionable lyrics. The youth also were generating ideas for the event that are more ambitious than they realized, and that might be so costly that they will need to dip into the station's funds to cover them. Cliff knows and trusts many of the veterans on the planning committee, and they trust him, but he recognizes risks in some of their ideas. We want you to talk in your breakout groups and imagine you are Cliff Sullivan in this situation. What would you do?
How many of you brought your table I want to get a temperature on these concerns. How many were you concerned about the reputation of the organization? Is that a major concern? Some of you, poor quality event? Not as big a concern, okay. Questionable lyrics? Okay, that was a bigger deal. Financial risks? Okay, bottom line, safety came up. Okay, so a lot of situations in practice, you've got 8 different things to think about, right? Decision making is not A versus B or 1 versus 2, as I said at the beginning, but involves complicated situations. And in terms of when leaders set limits, they had a lot of complicated descriptions of when they'd set limits, but one of the most interesting things that was a theme was, okay, so the issue is, they're supposed to be in charge. You keep telling them it's their programs. When do you set a limit? We found a lot of cases in which kind of the underlying issue was that they foresaw blind spots in youth thinking. Things that youth didn't see. Remember, those executive skills aren't yet fully developed. Sometimes leaders expect, Shep Zeldin said, sometimes leaders expect youth to do things that even they couldn't do. Compared to your abilities, they don't always foresee things. So research shows that even experienced professionals in any field, from doctors to battlefield commanders, become very good at running mental simulations and anticipating how complex situations unfold. And so for a lot of things, adults are better at doing that. They're also better at estimating probabilities. And so adults seem to be better, of course, at anticipating adult concerns like money and how this might look. They also foresaw some dynamics in youth behavior that the youth didn't bring up. So one example is if the youth were planning something and the leader could see it's going to get bogged down or that it was too complicated. In those circumstances, they often set limits to help kind of set some boundaries or set a deadline. Often at the beginning, kids had a hard time getting started because there were so many choices. So they did some structuring and channeling and deadline setting to help youth move through some of those spots that they'd seen from before can be really difficult. Another interesting, this was from a drama program, but this leader said, it gave the example of when she's rehearsing violent scenes in a play. So they did West Side Story, and she concluded there's a very fine line, especially with young men. They want to go further. They want to push the envelope. They want to be more real, more realistic, and people get hurt. And she learned from experience, for example, when they played West Side Story, there's a scene in which Riff and Bernardo get into a fight, and the young men were very intense, and they were trying to explore their feelings in the moment, and Bernardo spat in the face of Riff, and it was like, okay, wait a minute. And since then, she's much more kind of controlled about, and they do classes in fight scenes, and she's more careful about that. But again, kids may not be as good at you at predicting the distant future, so keep that in mind. The other question was, how do you set limits? How do you set boundaries? And we found that the experienced leaders laid groundwork in advance. So Cliff Sullivan, he had an executive board, and as we discussed under the advice section, youth on the board learned to ask questions. He schooled them in asking questions, and the older members of the board schooled them. What will go wrong? Will this work? How will different people react to that choices? And it was the board's job to anticipate some of those blind spots, and they got very good at it. Another thing is just be firm when you need to be. One of our favorite leaders, Nancy Adams, who from Nutrition Rocks, said, I want them to have ownership. She's really a strong believer in that. So I need to know when it's important for me to have my way and when it's theirs. And she and other leaders who'd been around a long time grew more and more confident about knowing where those limits are. And Cliff Sullivan said, I wouldn't be dishonest and say that's a great idea and then roll my eyes later when it didn't work out. So part of it was, okay, you don't want them to go against the way you want it to go and then later be humiliating them because it was a bomb. So the lesson is be strong, and if you have caring and trusting relationships with the youth and you're consistent, youth will respect limit setting. Another thing is stay involved, keep a foot in the door. The fact that a program is youth-led does not mean that you remove yourself from the conversation. Even after an initial green light, our experienced leaders provided steering. In fact, youth liked and counted on some of that kind of monitoring and question asking that came along. Without that guidance and monitoring, you said they wouldn't feel as confident in taking risks, that having that sort of safety net or that monitoring really helped empower them. Rather than disempowering, that advice helped them. So going back to the 4th of July celebration, and I'm sorry we don't have more time to discuss that with you, but I'll tell you what Cliff did. He had several youth from the board listen to videos from the rappers, and they chose one rapper where they then played the lyrics to the whole group, and then they asked questions, and the whole group decided, okay, we're going to nix this one rapper. In their program, they had a lot of money left over, so money wasn't a concern. And Cliff had kind of a checklist about deciding whether to go or not. And first, his first item was, if I have time to deal with any fallout. Okay, so me, and that's important. Your time, your emotions, you need to consider those in making decisions. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're left carrying something that makes you resentful. I can't say that enough. You're important, your well-being, your sanity is an important part of the equation. He then said, if it's not going to cause us to go broke, if it's not going to cause anyone to be unsafe, if it's safe financially, physically, and emotionally, then it's worth a shot. Okay, so he said yes in this circumstance. In fact, as he predicted, it didn't work out that well, but they gave it a try and they learned the hard way. Sometimes the best way for youth to learn about their blind spots is to see them played out. But he also said it depends on how you describe success or failure. It was a success in that people had fun and they learned a lot. But it wasn't a success in terms of certain other criteria. So just to conclude, I guess I could summarize, but given fading time, I wanted to spend a little time on the next one, which is supporting youth despite concerns. I think we have about 8 minutes or so. So we asked about this because we wanted to know, okay, what if you have concerns? And we already talked about this dilemma, so we're not going to do a breakout session. This is the situation in which they had this choice of the youth wanted to create their own presentation. And I talked about youth having blind spots. Well, maybe adults have blind spots too. And the leaders here was kind of saying that, well, sometimes they know better than I do. Forget about the state. Maybe they know. And furthermore, these youth were really motivated. There was a particular youth, Deborah, that kind of stepped forward and she became really engaged. And so they went with their plan. They rehearsed it over and over again with different practice audiences. So they really polished it, and it was a really good success. So even when major leaders had major concerns, if there were low stakes, they trusted the specific youth, if youth had good reasoning, if youth were willing to put the time in and take responsibility for the work. And I guess the big point I want to make here is leaders' priorities here was really trying to give youth latitude to learn from thinking things through, trying ideas, observing the outcomes. This was a big, big priority. They always gave kids the benefit of the doubt if it was going to be a learning experience. And again, I'm a developmentalist, so this is important to me, but the leaders said, my work is based on mistakes. Ultimately, they have to run their lives. I want them to have practice. And that cycle of learning is really powerful for them to have a plan, to think through the challenges with help from the leaders, create an action plan, test it out, circle back, learn from it, have a reflective session afterwards with some adult guidance, and then do it again. And so Nutrition Rocks, I'm not going to tell you about them, but with those games we talked about, they practiced them twice by themselves before, where they did it. Then they had 4 runs in the school, and then they did it 8 times in the summer camp with different groups of kids. And by the end, they were like had a full set of teaching skills. They knew all about motivation, behavioral control, and how to adjust your plan to different groups. Pamela West said 1 week it didn't work out, then the other week it worked. They learned that it was certain kids that they could do this with, and there were kids that they couldn't. So those multiple iterations can be so important with variation. They accumulate those experiences and come away with important learning. I guess the key points here are maximize opportunities for agency and learning, help youth have repeated cycles of learning, if possible. Let me just kind of make a few conclusions here. In the youth development field, we tend to think of agency and youth authority as mutually exclusive, but in terms of daily decision making, that's maybe not always the most helpful thing. I don't want to throw that away completely because the extremes can be difficult, but our leaders found quite a bit of space between there to be authoritative here, but kind of compensate there. And we described leaders' role in terms of what we called an art of restraint. They were very judicious about when they used their authority. They chose their times when they had to be strong. And we summarize it in terms of several different points. So I'm going to give these are the lessons from our veteran leaders. The first thing first, they were strongly committed to supporting youth agency. They were strong believers in the power of youth. Youth really, when you give them a chance, when you believe in them, they can do great things. And it's part of their right. They have a right to try things. So our leaders limited how they gave advice and when they set limits. They often supported youth despite concerns. And they had a goal of helping youth learn agency skills. They used their authority judiciously in situations where it was needed. So they used it to set limits or steer youth around scenarios they had learned from past experience that could be problematic. They employed soft touch techniques to kind of steer youth when they needed to. And they sometimes provided more directive advice or limit setting according to the need. And a big point that I've sort of mentioned all along, but we saw in our leaders too, was experience was so valuable. Again and again, they said, I've learned not to do it this way. I've learned to do it this way. And, you know, us academics don't see all of that. I mean, if I had a choice about how to run my practice, don't just pay attention to the academics or the people coming from on high who are using equations. Get a chance to talk to veteran youth leaders in your program because they just have a lot of wisdom, practical wisdom about how to do this. And what we found as a conclusion was they cultivated responsive developmental space for youth to support their opportunities for agency and learning. Between those two extremes, through their negotiation, they created that kind of free space in which kids felt protected, felt like they weren't going to make big bloopers, that the leader had their back, but leaders did some leading from behind, some structuring beforehand, and did that in ways that in the long run really helped empower youth. So again, we shouldn't necessarily think of adult authority and youth agency as opposites, but judicious use of authority helps create this safe learning space. Now, in your packet, I have a number of action steps that we kind of got from our research. You know, the first one is relationships, relationships, relationships. Everything we've talked about today depends on you developing trusting relationships. If you don't have that, you're not going to have authority. I'm not going to go through this because we kind of made these points, but you know, first point, respect the assets of youth. They know a lot of things that we don't know. They're creative, they're intelligent, they have capacities, but also think about what your assets are, who you are, what you can offer, construct your role with the youth in a way that is comfortable, and then be deliberate and intentional in your use of authority. And last, find ways to achieve multiple goals. As a leader, you're always got 8 things you're trying to do. Sometimes you can do both. And our leaders are really great just to hear the words they use. You know, they could acknowledge the youth's agency and set a limit at the same time. And I can't describe all the different occasions where they had wordings that kind of helped them achieve both, you know, without apologizing. And then the last thing I just want to talk about is reflective practice. You know, one of the key messages is you learn from experience. You need to adjust what you do to the nuances of a situation, but make time to reflect on what you're doing, what worked, what didn't, under what some circumstances. You may want to make a journal. And if at all possible, find colleagues or a group with whom you can have reflective sessions. You know, if your organization allows that, it would be really, really wise for them, because my experience with people in the field is they often feel really alone. They're making these big decisions that they really worry about because they're complicated. Having a group where, you know, once a month you can sit down and kind of talk through what you did. Teachers are starting to do this a lot, where they're able to, is have a kind of learning community where you can talk about the dilemmas you faced or the different plans you've tried. And then the last thing is experiment with different ways. If you don't experiment, you're not going to learn. Okay? Don't just do it one way. try different things, and that's one of the really great talents of leaders is, and I haven't talked to you that much, but I know you're all really creative people who have great ideas. Try things out. You're going to learn from experimentation. So thank you very much. It was delightful to talk with you, and I'll be around all day, so